So I want to start by taking you through the purpose of this session and what we're hoping to cover today. The purpose of our event is to take a deeper look into the process of drafting and validating the Feminist Peace Roadmap, which serves as a guiding framework for mediators and negotiators to support the peace process in Yemen. This event will give us the opportunities to hear from stakeholders involved in this process, to shed light on the relentless work of Yemeni women peacebuilders that made this roadmap come to life, and in validating and implementing it. We will also delve into an important topic that is not discussed enough, which is the severity of the climate crisis and how it's affecting the war in Yemen. And at the end, we will discuss recommendations and the way forward. Mainly, this event will provide a space for discussing important issues that involve the restrictive definition of ceasefire agreements and the need for a comprehensive definition of the violence involved, the need for a human rights-based approach to understanding ceasefire, acknowledge women's effort in peace building on the community level, and an analysis of the disproportionate effect of war on women and girls. I'm delighted and honored to have three guest speakers to open the conversation today. His Excellency Peter Derek Hoff, the Ambassador of the Kingdom of Netherlands to Yemen, Her Excellency Sahar Ghanem, the Yemeni Ambassador to the Netherlands. She's also the non-resident Ambassador to Norway and Sweden, and His Excellency Timothy Linden King, the US Special Envoy for Yemen. We are also thrilled to have a panel of feminist Yemeni peacebuilders, Dr. Balqis Abu Isba, the Chairwoman of Awam Foundation and former member of the Women Technical Advisory Group and member of the Yemeni Women Pact for Peace and Security, Dr. Nadia Saqaf, the founding member of the National Reconciliation Movement, and she was the first woman appointed as the Information Minister in Yemen, and she's now a researcher and director of the Arab Brain Trust. Al-Ustada Maha Awad, the Chairwoman of Wugood for Human Security, and she's also the founding member of the Feminist Summit. Al-Ustada Ishraq Al-Maqtari, she's a lawyer and activist in the field of protecting and promoting human rights in Yemen and an expert of the National Committee for Investigation of the Alleged Human Rights Violations. Dr. Ahmed Al-Ubaid, he's currently working in the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights as a senior advisor on the human rights of migrant workers with focus on the GCC countries. He's also a Peace Track Initiative board member. And last but not least, Al-Ustada Rishi Jerhum, she's the director of Peace Track Initiative and co-founding member of the Women's Solidarity Network. All bios are available on the NGO forum for the CSW66. And thank you all for giving us your time and guidance today. Without further ado, I will give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Hoff for opening remarks. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon to everybody. It's really an honor to be in this side event amongst such renowned speakers and participants. It's an event on the Feminist Roadmap to Peace and the nexus between conflict and environmental challenges. And I would like to thank, first of all, our valued partners, WILPF and Peace Track Initiative, for organizing this event. And today's event will put a focus on environmental challenges in Yemen and the strong influence that climate change and conflict are having on Yemeni women and youth. 2 weeks ago, I visited Sana'a, Hodeidah, and Ras Isa to help push for a solution to the Safar tanker crisis. We all know that this is a ticking time bomb, potentially one of the biggest oil spills in world's history, that will not only destroy the fragile ecosystem in the Red Sea, but also damage the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of Yemeni, and will severely impact the lives of women and girls. We therefore also need to include the voices of women in finding a sustainable solution, including in the contingency planning. And this case proves once again the importance of paying attention to the nexus between gender, environment, and conflict. Combating climate change is a top priority, I believe, for all of us, including for the new Dutch government, my government. And we really need to step up our ambitions to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and to combat climate change, both at home and abroad. In Yemen, none of the SDGs will be reached in 2030. And according to the Global Climate Risk Index, Yemen was the 28th most climate affected country in 2020. And we already see now the effects of climate change in Yemen, including pest outbreaks that deepen the poverty and food security situation in Yemen. We see that women face burdens of environmental disasters disproportionately. And we also see how they provide, but we also see how they provide relief during emergencies. We see how they support and reduce tensions within their communities. And we are convinced that we cannot tackle the climate challenge without including the expertise, the voice, and the needs of women. Feminist and youth movements from around the world have been mobilizing for climate action and have been leading, been on the forefront in finding climate solutions. And in the same way, inclusive peace starts and can only be sustainable if women and youth are included. During the last 7 years of conflict, women in Yemen were the first responders when war started. We saw them at IDP camps as humanitarian service providers. When cholera broke out, we saw them going from one house to another to raise awareness on community and household hygiene. When floods hit different governorates, they helped restoring land and livelihoods. When COVID-19 hit the country, they supported health systems by working day and night at hospitals and medical centers. Women have the experience, the knowledge, and most of all, the right to be included in every aspect of political and social participation. And this includes political processes, decision-making and governance at all levels on issues related to climate change and the environment. We as the Netherlands strongly support and advocate for this right. And I'm happy to note that the UN Envoy, in its consultation process on the framework for negotiations, not only advocates for, but demands the inclusion of women, not only as a separate group, but as an integral part of delegations of the parties. And we as the Netherlands, we strongly support Hans Grunberg in his vital efforts. Looking at today's meeting, I am glad to see that there are many Yemeni experts present, and I look forward to listening to their views. We must place the experience and solutions of those at the front lines at the center of our climate response. We are proud of our collaboration with WILPF and PTI because they enable Yemeni women to channel their priorities and demands to various decision-making structures. And I would like to call on you to work closely and to continue to work closely with the Envoy's office in Amman and to express your views, whether you're invited or not. The Feminist Roadmap is a product of continuous and dedicated efforts to bridge the gaps of women's participation and leadership in the peace process in Yemen. And we think it should provide an important vision of what inclusive and just peace in Yemen will look like and how we can get there. So thank you very much. I look forward to a fruitful discussion, and I'm very eager to hear what international actors can do and can do better to contribute to peace and conflict mitigation and the impact and reducing the impact of climate change in Yemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hoff. And it's very important to hear about the Dutch interest and backing of Yemeni women in their Thrive for Feminist agenda and for justice in Yemen. So thank you so much for ever stressing that commitment. I move to Her Excellency Ambassador Sahar Ghanem for her opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Risha, thank you again, Peace Initiative Track, for inviting me to speak in this kind of events again. It's not like a remark, it's more as it is my usual habit to speak my minds about these kind of issues. But let me first start by thanking on behalf of the government of the US, the government of the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden for supporting Yemen, but especially for today for supporting the Yemeni women, empowering women, active participation of women since the beginning of the transitional process, not only for today. And I would like really to speak again from my own background on the topic of today. As Mr. Or Ambassador Peter Derek Hoff spoke about the environmental threats, and that women are part or most affected by that. But in my opinion, it is very important that we see women not in a victimized way, but as a very active actors that can be part of the solutions. And here, let us speak about the importance of involving women at the local level. Russia, again, Peace Track Initiative, Women Solidarity Network did a very great work, bringing not only pioneers and prominent women to the scene to hear their voices, but also they could brought women from local backgrounds, local communities. And that is also very important for those women because they are the one able to express the needs of their people. They are the women who are also reflecting the diversity of the Yemeni society, and also the ones who can be very active in representing and implementing all the policies that will be created by their own, by their also participation, but not only in drafting the policies, but also implementing and the awareness raising needed in these kind of interventions. So it is very important not to speak only on national level of the Yemeni women, but also especially that we have today, as I understood from Russia, donors and policymakers from different countries who are interested in supporting the Yemeni women. And I think that it is very important to think that peace is not only about ceasing hostilities. Peace is about the stability of the local communities, about participation, inclusiveness. It is about having a state, a functioning government, rule of law everywhere, and that needs women everywhere, not as victims, but as active actors. And here we need to mention, I believe, and we will hear from our hero women on grounds that we have today about this kind of active participation despite all the challenges. But it is very important also to think about that perspective of peace that will be created from the bottom, peace that local people will be creating. And here, when we speak about women, we don't only speak about the gender part of it, not only the women citizens, but we speak also men, women, youth who have gender and feminist agenda and feminist priorities, and that they know equal only a prosperous country can be or can happen when we have equal citizenship, and that equal citizenship should start from today, not to wait till we have completely establishing the state to start implementing this concept. Equal citizenship can be starting from today, and we could see that the role of women today is changing the stereotypes, not only in civil society, in government. And here, for me, as a person who was from a civil society background that moved to now being with the government, I understand the very important need to close this gap between the government and between the civil society. And that was a discussion we had before also with Women Solidarity Network. How can we all, women together, came from all backgrounds, governmental backgrounds, civil society backgrounds, political backgrounds, and how can we together make sure that this feminism agenda or feminist agenda is implemented and promoted wherever we are. So today, I think I argue also our Yemeni women who are very active in promoting the importance of a feminist peace, to start also doing that locally. I think we have all the support also now from the local authorities. Today, for example, we had I mean, when I say we, I mean the Yemeni ambassadors to Europe, and we had a meeting with Sheikh Sultan Al Arada, the governor of Maghreb. And during his speech, he emphasized the need of the participation of women and youth and civil society. And that is something I believe is a reflection of the work and the efforts of the Yemeni women and youth that started during the transitional process and could change the stereotyping of the role of women and could really made our also local authorities and national authorities aware of this importance. I don't want to take much more time, but all my I will conclude my suggestions or comments on that or insights in that. I hope that we first work together as one front line for women participation. And here I'm speaking about government, civil society, political parties, and international community. From the other side, my recommendation is that we focus on local levels when we support women. This is very important, and not to victimize them, and not only to work from temporary interventions, but more sustainable interventions that can have sustainable presence of women as actors, as leaders, as active actors, I mean, from the leadership to the lower also levels of the institutions. It is very important when we think about peace, we think about women, peace and women participation, we think about rule of law, about a functioning government, because in my opinion, the only guarantor of having or achieving equal citizenship and women participation is to have an inclusive and a functioning and a government that will an inclusive government, but also carry on or accountable for achieving the equal citizenship and achieving the good governance, which I hope our supporters from the international community also work on that. And this is a discussion we have recently a lot. The third thing I think will help is the capacity building, and not only in peace building fields or the temporarily or the short capacity building programs. But here I'm speaking about more long-term capacity building from all backgrounds on all fields. Because when we speak about local communities, we need women from all backgrounds, not only to be managers or in positions in the government, I mean, as only the administration side, but we need also women who are aware of all the fields that are needed to for the policy drafting on local levels. For example, here I will mention something happened recently, that is a meeting we had here in The Hague with the embassy of the Netherlands in Yemen. With our researchers and the students in water sector in The Hague, in the Netherlands. And in my opinion, investing on women and youth on those kind of fields is very important, because those are the leaders of tomorrow, and those of today and tomorrow. And those are the people who can create better circumstances and better institutions for Yemen. I will conclude with that. I don't want to go much of this, but thank you very much for inviting me again, and I welcome any questions or any comments on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ghanem. And it's really important to hear the Yemeni government's commitment to work closely with civil society, and particularly on the local level, which has been absolutely phenomenal in Yemen. And we would like to continue this coordination and stress it as much as possible. I move now to His Excellency Timothy Lenderking, the US Special Envoy for Yemen, and I appreciate, Mr. Lenderking, that you have to leave soon, so thank you for making time for being with us to your opening remarks. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Leila, and thank you to the Peace Track Initiative for inviting me again this year. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you and such a distinguished group and many people I've had the pleasure to meet, at least virtually. And of course, it's always nice to serve on a panel with Ambassador Peter Derek Hoff, and I really appreciate all the efforts that he has made and his government on the Safar tanker issue. The way that he highlighted that, we're very much joining forces. We are 100% on board with prioritizing this issue, in addition to everything else that's going on. But we can't forget the threat that this poses, and to meet Ambassador Sahar Ghanem, also a great pleasure, very important. And I thank you for your remarks. From the U.S. point of view, I mean, I can't associate any more than what's been said about the importance of women's meaningful participation in peace efforts. It has to be a priority. And I think when we talk about efforts to address the immediate needs and priorities of those most impacted by the conflict, but again, the point not solely as victims, but as participants. But there are heavy burdens placed on women and also members of other marginalized groups. We in the United States, we are very committed to a durable and inclusive resolution of the conflict that ends this war in Yemen, improves Yemeni lives, and creates the space for diverse Yemenis to collectively determine their own future. This is a top U.S. foreign policy priority. And I think that we can help do this by leveraging our diplomatic strength and our energy and our regional efforts, regional relationships to support the UN-led process. And in doing so, to promote justice and accountability in Yemen. My mandate, as outlined by the president, is twofold: to help advance a durable and inclusive resolution and to help advance immediate efforts to mitigate the humanitarian crisis. Last week, as you know, there was a donor event. The United States announced nearly $585 million for the humanitarian crisis. It's our largest single contribution to date, bringing the total amount of U.S. contributions to nearly $4.5 billion. Sounds like a lot, but it's not enough. And I know how we were all disappointed and I think frustrated by the pledges at that event. I want you all to know that we don't regard that as the final answer. When I travel to the Gulf next week, we'll be taking up this issue. There has to be humanitarian assistance. It has to be robust. And we, for one, do not want to see the Yemeni people let down, given all the stress that they're under from the fighting, the destruction of infrastructure, and all the problems, the dislocation and the displacement that go on with that. So we will continue approaching donors and trying to press as much as we can for continued support, also on the economic side, because I think we all know how much there are economic factors separate from the humanitarian factors that are drivers of this conflict and continue to prolong the war in ways that I think are most unfortunate. So we're working to mitigate the economic crisis through technical support and advocacy for critical economic reforms, support for livelihoods and jobs, and pressure on the parties to cease actions that exacerbate economic stability. I do have to say that we also, I must reiterate our commitment to ensuring the safety of those who serve the U.S. government. And to that end, we demand the Houthis release the detained U.S. and UN locally employed staff in Sana'a who have been held incommunicado for much too long, for many, many months. With regard to the peace efforts, we're deeply concerned that the military escalation we have seen since the beginning of the year will jeopardize peace efforts. We condemn attacks by all parties that lead to escalation in Yemen and extend the conflict. Recent Houthi losses in Yemen should indicate to them and all the parties that there is no military solution. Earlier this week, the UN Special Envoy announced he is working on a possible truce during the holy month of Ramadan. The United States fully supports a truce in Yemen. We also welcome the launch of UN consultations and UN Special Envoy Grunberg's efforts to craft a new, more inclusive and comprehensive peace process. We call on all parties to seize this new opportunity for peace. The power to do so is in their hands. The conflict is at heart a Yemeni conflict, and a Yemeni solution is needed, but a durable solution also requires removing any undue foreign influence from Yemen, whether from Yemen's neighbors or Iran. It must also lay the foundation for more productive relations between Yemen and its neighbors, including economic cooperation. It's deplorable, ladies and gentlemen, that civilians continue to bear the brunt of Yemen's conflict, and that women and girls are impacted most acutely. Women in Yemen already face some of the greatest inequalities around the world. After more than 7 years of conflict, an estimated 6.1 million women in Yemen are in urgent need of protection services. 73% of the over 4 million internally displaced people in Yemen are women and children, and approximately 30% of displaced households are now headed by women, compared to 9% before the escalation of the conflict in 2017. We've also seen worrying rises in rates of gender-based violence, as much as 50%. Women must play a vital role alongside men in resolving the conflict. As we have heard from others and know well from other conflicts around the world, when women participate in peace processes, the resulting agreement is more widely responsive, more durable, and more effectively implemented. By including women, civil society leaders, and members of marginalized communities, we can help ensure that diverse perspectives and priorities across the country are represented and meaningfully incorporated into any peace agreement to improve the lives of all Yemenis and not just the warring parties. Just like Peter, I had a chance to visit Yemen in the last 2 weeks. I can tell you there's nothing better for an envoy to Yemen to spend time in Yemen. I mean, it is so heartening and heartbreaking at the same time to see conditions in Yemen. But I had the opportunity to speak with an advocate from Hadramaut who described the ways that rural Yemeni women have been disempowered over the course of the conflict. She spoke powerfully about the need for real empowerment of Yemeni women, to empower them to speak for themselves about their needs and to ensure that all women have the resources and the services they need to thrive. We applaud the efforts of the Peace Track Initiative and specifically the Peace Roadmap to amplify the voices of Yemen women leaders. It remains critical that we keep women's participation and inclusion at the top of the international community's agenda. Finally, the United States is committed to leveraging the strength of Yemeni voices advocating for peace, to leveraging the international consensus for a true ceasefire and a political solution, and leveraging the momentum around a more inclusive UN peace process to help advance a just and durable solution to the Yemen conflict. Yemen deserves, and Yemenis deserve, a more peaceful, prosperous country in which they can live in safety and dignity. Thank you very much. Shukran jazilan.
Thank you very much for your remarks. And I will now move to Rishi Jerhum, the director of PTI and a co-founder of the Women's Solidarity Network, to walk us through the Feminist Roadmap to Peace and to talk to us about the process and further steps. Over to you, Rishi.
Thank you so much, Leila, and thank you for the guest speakers, and highly appreciate your opening remarks, and we look to collaborate more with you in the future. For what I wanted to share today, I wanted to highlight that we've been in war in Yemen for more than 8 years now. On the surface, it looks like it erupted from political reasons, but when we dig deeper, we can see that there was a combination of economic, social, and environmental reasons. Even way before the current war, the #1 reason for displacement crises in Yemen were related to environmental reasons, mainly droughts, floods, and hurricanes. Yemen also was ranking among the top countries in terms of water scarcity, and it was repeatedly said that Sana'a will be the first capital to run out of water. Armed conflicts related to water and land still continues, and it's war inside war that is ongoing. These environmental challenges did not stop but continued to happen, causing poverty, inequality, and affecting social justice in Yemen. Even before the war, it was said that Yemeni people go to sleep without eating dinner. There was a major food insecurity issue, and today we always hear that Yemen is on the brink of famine. The environmental challenges increased its impacts because of the war, and the state institutions weakened, including especially those programs that are targeting social protection and emergency responses. But the Yemeni women were at the front lines, responding to all of these crises and responding to the war and the consequences of the war, and also leading many interventions to address the climate change. Members, for example, members of the Women Solidarity Network, they mediated conflicts over water and land resources. They supported building infrastructure for water distribution based on environmentally sustainable solutions like solar power. They also addressed sanitation issues, which was a true challenge in conflict zones and that caused hazardous health disasters. The women farmers, which constitute more than 80% of the labor, continued to farm lands. We tracked around 200 Yemeni women coffee farmers who, against all odds, continued to produce coffee during the conflict. As Peace Track Initiative, one of the things we wanted to focus on is to influence the peace process. And we worked with women leaders to end the war. The first step was for us to work together to create or to develop the Feminist Peace Roadmap. We faced a lot of exclusion. When we were invited to peace processes, it was more tokenistic, and we continue to claim our space and make our influence through working through this Feminist Peace Roadmap. And basically, to give you an idea about the Feminist Peace Roadmap, as I said, it was we worked with 30 women leaders to develop it. These women came from different political backgrounds, different regions, having a balance of all South and North, coming together to write the Feminist Peace Roadmap. And it focused on the main issues that are in the peace process. We also partnered with 9 organizations to work on thematic issues. So we covered issues such as salaries, the issue of detainees, the issue of opening humanitarian corridors, transitional justice, and the South issue. And you will be hearing from women who worked with us on this Feminist Peace Roadmap and who led consultations as well to feed into the Feminist Peace Roadmap, and who were with us from the first draft, basically working on this in the last 3 years. We also solicited papers from women experts on the legal views of local governance and international humanitarian law to harmonize it with the Yemeni law to address the issues of accountability and transitional justice. We shared this draft of the Feminist Peace Roadmap in an online high-level convening that brought together more than 300 people, including local, national, regional, and international peace stakeholders and conflict parties, to provide feedback on the Feminist Peace Roadmap. This is all to tell you that we try to be very inclusive in the process of developing this Feminist Peace Roadmap, and to do it from bottom up at all levels, whether national, international, or regional. We involved the Office of the Special Envoy, the Office of the US Envoy, the coalition countries, the Yemeni government, the political parties, the political entities. And at the time, the Houthis apologized to be part of the convening because they were having a position in terms of boycotting the UN Envoy office. But we basically used their own vision that they published to feed into the Feminist Peace Roadmap, and we did a stakeholder analysis to understand the positions of the different parties. We worked also in terms of validating the Feminist Peace Roadmap in 10 governorates, and Maha, chairperson of Wujud Foundation, will talk to you more about that. Overall, there was more than 1,000 people basically consulted to work on this. It is acting as a guiding framework for the mediators and negotiators, and it needs to become a reference, an official reference for the peace process. And this is what we are pushing for, because it is based on human rights and human rights approach, basically. As Yemeni women, we are working so hard to decolonize the peace process and to increase the local ownership. We already are feeling the influence of and the impact of the Feminist Peace Roadmap. One of the things that the Peace Roadmap mentions is the prioritizing of Safir oil tanker, and the fact that the Dutch government have first supported us to write our priorities and reflect our priorities in this Feminist Peace Roadmap, and then they didn't sit back, they didn't take the back seat. They took an issue that we said it's a priority, and they worked on it to address it. This is the complementarity that we want to achieve with all the international community. Another example for this is the UN Security Council Resolution 2624 that was adopted last month. It has included stronger language in terms of gender because of the Feminist Peace Roadmap. This was the first time the gender language in terms of inclusion was as strong as it is mentioned. They also referred to the national dialogue outcomes of the 30% quota. It was really very nice to see, and it was under Chapter 7, which gives it more strength. The other thing is that it mentioned the inclusive process. It is something that we strongly supported in the Feminist Peace Roadmap. The process needs to be multi-party. This language was reflected in the UN Security Council resolution. And also the addressing sexual and gender-based violence and making it a priority. The government also very recently lifted the conditions on issuing passports on women. And this is also a big win, because we have mentioned in the Feminist Peace Roadmap that restrictions towards women's mobility needs to be lifted. So as we now are preparing to also head to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia to attend the intra-Yemeni talks sponsored by the Gulf Cooperation Council, we are going there with a vision. We are prepared. We have a vision to end the war. As Yemeni women movements, we haven't been more organized and more strategic than today. We are ready to be in the peace process, and we are going to influence it to end the war in Yemen. And I will stop here to give you room to hear from all the amazing women who are with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rasha. This is really inspiring, and I'd like to move quickly to Maha, who's the chairperson of Wujud for Human Security, to complement our idea about this, about this inclusive process, and tell us. So, Maha, you've been part of drafting the Feminist Roadmap, but also you've worked on the validating in 10 governorates. Could you tell us more about the validating process and the main outcome of this validation, please? شكرا.
Well, of course, first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone. And I'd like to salute all the efforts and all those who organized this parallel event and the participants in it. For the issue of the idea of organizing the workshops and governorates, it was based on the notion to follow up on the implementation of the recommendations of the high-level convening on the feminist peace, which was organized by PTI. The recommendation says that there should be a broad dialogue and consultations about the roadmap covering the local communities and different parties in order to allow the space to discuss the roadmap and to launch it. And the event of the fourth Feminist Summit launched the draft roadmap in addition to broad organization of a media campaign to produce a documentary, radio shows, and press materials in order to increase the awareness about this roadmap. I'll focus more on these workshops that we organized in 10 governorates. This was a very prominent event. It happened on the 1st of December at the same time at the level of selected governorates to implement the workshops for the purpose of presenting and discussing the feminist roadmap. And in fact, we were surprised that the roadmap was taken very seriously, and the community influential people produced inputs. This is the first roadmap of its kind in Yemen. It's a starting point to spread the notion of the inclusive peace and to engage the local communities in the consultations. So being close to the local communities and engaging them and discussing the roadmap at the level of the governorates of the South and the North equally to support consolidating the different visions, to consolidate the vision towards peace in Yemen, despite the conflict and the multiplicity of parties. The roadmap was discussed and enriched, and it helped in mobilizing the political and social people in order to support the roadmap. Having this feminist roadmap is a very important entry point to start a thematic discussion in order to have broad consultations and to have broad access to local communities and to understand the way Yemenis, men and women, want to build peace in their country. And it allowed an unprecedented opportunity to reinforce the legitimacy of the peace process based on the communities, the points or the topics of it. And this roadmap is approved as a guiding framework that can positively influence the peace process and the key stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking us through the process and the details of it. And I'd like to move from here directly to Sayyidah Ishraq al-Maqtari, who's an expert in the National Committee for Investigating the Alleged Human Rights Violations. You've been working on documenting violations against women's rights in Yemen. What are the major violations against women currently, and how important it is to address them during the peace process? And what are the main challenges that are facing women? And if you can link them to the impact of environmental destruction and its particular link to women's rights, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I believe that to continue the remarks that were already presented from the PTI on the roadmap, the feminist roadmap, we have worked since the beginning with you. And the roadmap is based on human rights, actually, approach. And so at the beginning, we have already indicated or referred to the key human rights violations Yemen are facing not only since 2015, but since 2011. And probably the situation has not changed, but there is an increasing trend of violations, and we have here more numbers of violations. Well, in fact, it is Ramadan is about to start, and we know about the economy and the prices and the lack of fuel and all these things. Well, they are manifestations of human rights violations, the economic and social aspects. Women are disproportionately affected, actually, because of the lack of all forms of social and economic protection. The National Commission for Inquiry and other civil society organizations focused on documenting and investigating human rights violations against women. And it is heartbreaking to say that the numbers, we have 2,700 women who were killed and injured because of the conflict. And for this, the conflict-related violations could be visible to many human rights defenders, but I believe at the same time that there is need to focus on the invisible violations. For example, the forcible dislocation or eviction, as women and men are evicted. We in the Commission, we have documented more than 800 cases of women who were evicted, and the right to housing for women. For example, the bombing of houses, the attacks against residential areas, women are disproportionately affected by that. We need to examine these violations against women because they are the direct and the indirect victims. There was a question about the impact of the environmental violations or the environmental situation on women. Well, I can say that the last year was the year of the coronavirus pandemic, in addition to cyclones and some environmental disasters that affected women living in IDP camps and in different cities in Aden, Lahij, Taiz, Bala, and different parts of the country where women are close to the front line and to the battlefield. Another issue is the targeting of women by mine laying, for example, in agricultural areas and in farms. You know that women do work in farming for their livelihoods and the livelihoods of their families, actually. And farming areas or agricultural areas are booby-trapped. Landmines are there. There are snipers, people, and therefore women had to abandon these spaces and to go into destitution. And this environment, these farms will dry out, and therefore it will be very difficult to restart the livelihoods of women. And this is an economic impact that needs to be taken into account in any peace negotiations. So I want to say that it is very positive that we see there is participation of women in the peace process, but other women should be part of it, including the victims, for example, women who do not have voices, those who are most affected by the violations. So we are seeing, for example, now some women movements that are created. For example, the Association of the Mothers of the Abductees, the Survivor Women and the Women Victims Associations and networks are being established now, and they need to be represented in the peace process and in any future consultations. I believe it was excellent that the roadmap that was developed by PTI and other components, the roadmap is excellent because it tackled some of these issues. The roadmap relies on clear references, international human rights conventions, gender perspectives, and all these things. And this is something very positive. But at the same time, all these items should be reflected at the same level, actually, in different agreements and peace talks. In fact, we do need to have a more careful analysis of the violations that are taking place against women, because since 2015 until 2018, there was still a kind of respect to the status of women in Yemen, and there weren't some direct violations against them because women were kind of respected. But after 2018, we have seen a new trend of violations against women. It does not mean that these things were not there before, but they have increased, and we because we had strong women then, we had better awareness. Actually, women started to talk about the violations being perpetrated against them. And this is a fact that is probably not visible to many of us. There are violations against women, storming houses, detention of women, attacking homes at night, the eviction of women, sexual harassment, rapes, and extortion by service providers, including, for example, those who provide humanitarian aid, be they local or international. So we have seen that, and we have seen these violations, and these are manifestations of the conflict. At the same time, there is a complete lack of any form of protection, including the direct protection through protection centers and shelters that should be provided by the state, represented by the Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor, as well as the indirect protection that should have been provided by the donors supporting civil society organizations in order to help women. So talking about violations is something that is very hard and cruel. So we want to be positive and we want to seize the opportunity, and we want victims to be engaged, to be included. They need to speak up about the violations perpetrated against them in the 3 stages that are mentioned in the roadmap: the ceasefire, the negotiations, and the final stage, which is the transitional period. So in all these phases, women should speak, should have a voice about the war and about the violations against them. So because sustainable peace should be built on human rights and justice to the victims and preventing impunity. And this will not happen if women are marginalized and if the violations against women are disregarded. So we have to make these violations visible, and we need to have women present on the table, and they need to voice their concerns and what happened to them. And these things happened all over Yemen. Another point, maybe which I missed, these violations sadly have taken a systemic approach trend recently in different governorates, actually, not in one governorate only. So maybe it's now in all parts of Yemen without any exclusion. I'll give you an example that we have seen some violations in the capital cities of governorates in Sana'a, Aden, Lahij, but there are other violations against women in some remote governorates which we cannot fully access. And these governorates were deprived from services, including, for example, Saada, Hajja, Al-Mahwit, Amra.
مع نسيان هذه المحافظات للأسف هو تم النسيان الأكبر للنساء. يعني بالأمس كنت يعني في تواصل مع إحدى الباحثات في مديرية حقور في محافظة حقة، وتتكلم عن الخوف الشديد الذي تعيش به النساء، وصمة نقول
speaking about the fear that intimidation that women are facing and the stigmatizing women when they go to follow up their for the relief assistance, and it's another also issue. Also talking about the IDPs women from Harat to some other to Hujur area. The point is that the statistics that we can see speaks about some areas and the towns of the governorates, the capital governorates, the nations that are prioritized, which is more notable, like airstrikes or mines, detonation of houses, etc. But there are some other hidden violations that impact women at particularly that is the stigmatization issue, displacement, and also using them to blackmail their families. As I mentioned, also they been living in the urban and living in the tents in different governorates in the IDPs camps. this we should be very keen when developing any peace process. First of all, sustainable and ultimate peace, that women should be present and should move, just to consider them as figures, then will disappear at the actual moments. But this unfortunately occurred at different stages, at different times. But with the overwhelming presence of women at the poverty issue also, we should be also documented these cases also to be reflected in any other process, or and to ensure genuine participation in making the Yemen future.
I want to particularly thank you for making the huge link.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sharaf.
The distribution of arms and women's rights, an unmissable link for almost all women activists that we work with, although it gets overlooked regularly by stakeholders. So thank you for stressing this, and also for stressing the need to coordinate and need to look at the pre-existing conditions. That was incredibly informative. Thank you very much. I'll move to دكتورة بلقيس أبو إصبع. شكرا دكتورة لوجودك معنا. As a former member of the Women Technical Advisory Group, how do you assess this mechanism as an inclusion tool? Where do you feel that you were able to influence the peace process through this mechanism? And was it a good combination between your work within and from outside of it? And what are the lessons learned? And how can we improve the mechanism itself and the way engagement with it so we can ensure effective inclusion?
مساء الخير جميعا. شكرا جزيلا ليلى، شكرا لمسار السلام.
Good evening. Thank you so much for Leila. Thank you for this track. I believe that we're talking now one of the very important mechanisms owned or established by the Special Envoy, which ensure women participation in building peace. I'm going to talk about the women consultative group, technical group at the Special Envoy, which has been formed in 2018 till date. I believe that this issue is very important from different dimensions. For instance, now we're discussing it for different reasons. First reason is that the resolution, UN Resolution 2624, which was issued recently, which stressed clearly on the significance of women involvement in the peace process. And the other point, the technical consultative group, women, is the only mechanism that administrated by the UN Special Envoy to involve women in the political process. The third point is that during the past period and during the issue of the resolution, 4 women were not invited to participate without any clear reasons for such exclusion of women. So we have been asking, how can we improve this mechanism? And how can we push it further to be more active mechanism in ensuring building peace? Fourth point, to poor participation of women. And this mechanism and having this consultative group compensates such shortfalls in women participation. I will understand that the climate livelihood, for water, for many things. This climate change made women think more about livelihood, more than involved in politics. And we are facing very big problem. The consultative group could be the solution or one of the mechanisms that need to be activated more. This consultative group is a voluntary group formed in 2018 from 8 members. This group was formed, as I said, based on the of women. We understand that women participation, different consultation was very poor. One woman in Geneva, one woman, and Bill in Switzerland, and 2 women in Kuwait, 1 woman in Stockholm talks. So now we are facing a real challenge, that is poor participation or underrepresentation of women in this process, peace building. So this mechanism came to compensate such shortfalls in women political participation. However, this mechanism needs to be activated. As I said, it has faced many challenges. These challenges could be turned into opportunities in the future, whereby it play a very prominent role. First of all, this mechanism when nominating the members in the consultative
متعددة ومختلفة ولكن دون معايير واضحة لهذه الاختيارات. أيضا تم تبديل المجموعة يعني
based on their background in different areas and courses. However, without any clear criteria on the nomination. Also, the group was changed for several times in very irregular or uninstitutional manner and based on group proceedings. Women have very significant participation within this during the talks and consultations, but a great role during these talks and consultations to provide political advice at issues which have been subject to discussion and during parts of the conflict and urgent decisions, specific decisions. How that means they have played a great role to bring in different viewpoints closer and in advocating some issues during the breaks or behind the curtain. So now this mechanism is very important, but need to be more activated. Also, we have wrote a number of consultative papers since the establishment of this consultative group and during the Stockholm talks and after that. However, these papers, there is no clear mechanism to identify these themes. Sometimes these themes could be some issues or themes were not addressed in this for discussion. However, now need a clear mechanism to exchange this consultative papers and how to present them to stakeholders inside Envoy office. They only sent, but not where they end. The consultative group has faced many challenges during their work, and one of these challenges that the group did not have a source, one unified source of information or certain meetings with the envoys. There is interruption from the source. The successive envoys, there is no clear focus on the issues not to be addressed by the group.
مع المجموعات النسائية أو التحالفات النسائية. كثير من اللغط حول عمل المجموعة الاستشارية وحول الدور الذي تقوم به.
Could not meet with different human coalitions. This has been our work, and on the role recently we have had some questionnaire made by Wujud for humanitarian security, led by Mahawat. This questionnaire has identified this gap between the consultative group and the feminist organizations who doesn't know, they understand, who does not understand the working of the consultative group because there is no meetings with each other, formal or informal. They participate in personal capacities, but there is no kind of formal meetings to tell them what is going on and to convey the information to and from. Also, there is no clear introduction to this consultative group only recently. When we had a meeting in Geneva, Stockholm, they were very surprised who are these women. They didn't know when they have been appointed or designated as consultants in this group. So there is kind of a gap or understanding the role of this consultative group and what is their role. This consultative group could not strengthen women's negotiations because their role was very limited, and most of its roles were only consultative. Therefore, we still need additional mechanisms beside the consultative group to reach into more tangible outcomes and to involve women more. I believe that to activate this consultative group, I think that there should be
هذه الآلية واضحة وشفافة سواء في الاختيار أو
conversation with the UN envoy, and also to have to clarify the role of this mechanism, and also about the nomination.
عدد الأعضاء داخل المجموعة الاستشارية كل ما كان هذا
a voluntary group. My point is that all members who have in this consultative group more useful that we. But
اثنين إنهم تفعيل دور المجموعة الاستشارية.
I'd like to understand the women opinions, also activate the role of the consultative groups and consulting and communicating with different feminist groups and coalitions and to exchange information between all these two groups to benefit or to learn from each other. The harmonize between the discourse and the practice. The discourse of the UN envoy, that he's talking about the consultative group, that he's saying he's meeting them always and take their advice, but actually, in reality, we do meet us, but unfortunately, this not happening. So we have to harmonize between their speech, their discourse, and their practice in the ground. I believe that I need to amend this group administration to have not only gender, it's not gender responsive gender section. We should have another sections in the UN envoy to be responsible for this group of this group. I believe this consultative group, according
جميع النساء تفضل أن تظل هذه الآلية ولكن يجب أن يعاد.
Women prefer to continue this mechanism, however, but it is a formation be reconsidered, and it is establishment how to benefit from it and from this mechanism, considering the climate change that prevent many women from political participation. I believe that this mechanism could be one of the mechanisms through which women could access different to identify or to also to assess the rules and the opinions so much.
قمتم بها.
Thank you, Dr. Burkis, and for all the efforts you have exerted as members in this group, consultative group, and we believe these challenges we are talking about. We're sorry that you have faced all these challenges and difficulties because you have faced all these challenges and also face all the criticism. You have burdened all this the criticism, although the decision taken were not your responsibility. Thank you so much for all the work you have done within this group, and also for keeping the international civil society and feminist groups on the ground to be aware of what is going on, despite the poor information and lack of communication, as you said, and lack of the communication tools or mechanism. Thank you so much. So for
National Reconciliation Movement, please share with us your experience about women's role in influencing the peace process during the national dialogue and then currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you, everyone, and Peace Track for this wonderful event. And it's not surprising because Peace Track always has amazing and fabulous events. Let me start from the National Dialogue Conference, and I want to remind everybody here with the amazing experience when the women came from all sectors and all walks of political life and even independent women together, and they lobbied and they achieved the 30% quota for women. So it didn't come very easily, but they did it. And for the first time, they managed to get the political parties to agree and sign it. And this is the achievement that we have until today. And as Rasha was mentioning, it's also endorsed in the international decrees around Yemen. This can be replicated. So we're not starting from scratch. We're actually using the lobbying techniques and the advocacy. And as also been mentioned before, the women's movement today in Yemen is as strongest as it has ever been. And this means not only at the political level, because women are also the frontline defenders when it comes to humanitarian aid and distribution of relief. As Ishraq was talking, they are the advocates for human rights. They sacrifice their lives, their freedom, their reputation to defend others. They're also, in terms of sustainable development, they're entrepreneurs, they're working in, they're now heads of households. As we know from an economic perspective, so many women are now taking lead in terms of providing for their families. And they're also in touch with reality on the ground. The credibility of women and the women's movement in Yemen is very strong because they are more realistic in terms of providing an insight into what the community needs and carrying it forward. So it is not, we should not begrudge women when they say we demand access to positions of power. And when we came in 2020 and said no government, no women, no government, with that hashtag against the government, when it had no women at all in its positions, it wasn't looking for a position of power per se, although we have all the right to look for it if we want to. It was because without women, you will not have sustainable governance, you would not have peace. And the Feminist Roadmap is actually an example of this because it's an inclusive one. And when we say feminist, we're not just talking about women, we are talking about women, men, and all the other social groups that we have in the society. So what do we want now? We want a national platform, and even more than one national platform. We want to revive the political discipline. I'm afraid the political parties today, and many of you already know, are not sufficient or adequate to bring us to peace and even beyond peace, because we're not just talking about signing an agreement, we're talking about delivering and taking Yemen to the next step. So we need different platforms. We need, like I represent the National Reconciliation Movement, and this is an initiative that's been 2 years in the making, and it has 40% women and it has 60% youth. And the National Reconciliation Movement has many Yemeni professionals from all walks of life, including military personnel, including politicians and diplomats and so on, and within Yemen and outside Yemen. And so we're trying to advocate for peace as an alternative and reconciliation at the very local level. So what happens now is that we need feminist movements, we need political movements, we need youth initiatives to start taking their position, the rightful position, like we did with the National Dialogue Conference. Now we need, maybe the Riyadh is going to, the Riyadh talks in Riyadh are an opportunity, but they should not be the only one. And we should have ones at the local level in Yemen. We should start having dialogues, and they should be facilitated by women. To be honest, I think if we have events at the local level moderated and facilitated by strong women, we will be able to create momentum, and we will have the engagement of the buy-in from the local communities. So I just want to conclude on that. The future is feminine. The future is one that all women of Yemen can unite behind, because they are the ones who are going to create sustainable peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and what a wonderful note to end on. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا وشكرا على الملاحظات الرائعة. هذا كان حديث ملهم كالعادة. معذرة. إذن يمكننا الآن أن ننتقل إلى الأسئلة والأجوبة. لدينا بعض الأسئلة من الجمهور قبل الانتقال للدكتورة للاختتام. السؤال الأول موجه إلى السيدة إشراق المقري. How do you think that the women violence impact the food security? How do you address the domestic violence against women? And do you think the committee could access all areas in Yemen, or are there some difficulties in that you face in accessing some areas in the country? Thank you so much, Ms. Ishraq.
Ms. Ishraq al-Maqtari, I might pose this question until she sorts out her connection problem. Perhaps we move to the next question, which is addressed at Sayyida Maha Awad. Sorry. سيدة مها، هل ممكن تحكي لنا أكثر عن إشراك الرجال في عملية
Could you just tell us more about involving men in the procedures you have taken in the different 10 governorates in which you have organized your meeting consultations, and what are the recommendations from this governorates, and whether it was that accepted by the local communities? The peace track was accepted, or peace initiative was accepted at the local level. Please, the floor is yours.
عمليا فعلا هي المساحة اللي أتيحت فيها عقد مشاورات لخارطة الطريق للسلام النسوي كانت بمثابة فرصة لفتح المجال للنقاش وأيضا تبادل الآراء والأفكار في مادة أو في مسودة معدة سلفاً تم إجرائها بطريقة أنا أستطيع أن أقول إنه هناك كان تفاعل فاق التوقع في مسألة طرح الموضوع، وخاصة في إطار نقاشات عن موضوع السلام. كان لازم أنوه بداية لنقطة إن من هي المحافظات التي شملها ورش العمل أو التي شملتها ورش العمل. هي كانت عدن وتعز عدن وتعز مأرب وصنعاء وحقة وحضرموت وشبوة وأبين ولحج. فكان يعني في وصول حتى للمناطق التي هي تحت سيطرة جماعة أنصار الله وعقد الورش فيها، وكان في تفاعل. يعني كان المشاركات والمشاركين التي هم من مختلف أو من فئات متنوعة، من السلطة المحلية، من الأحزاب، من المنظمات، النشطاء، المحامين، المحاميات. هذه الفئات التي فعلا أثرت، قدمت ما هو ممكن من مقترحات. أنا في وجهة نظري شفت كيف أنها ساهمت في تكملة ما لم تتضمنه أو تستوعبه الخارطة في طرح العديد من القضايا كنظرة من المجتمع المحلي لتصميم السلام الشامل للقضايا. أضف إلى ذلك أنه إنزال الخارطة للنقاش والعرض في مراحل جاءت فيها مستجدات نشأت بعد إعداد مسودة الخارطة، فكان في اعتبار لهذه المستجدات من خلال الآراء التي طرحت إلى ضرورة تضمينها في الخارطة. هناك محافظات على سبيل المثال شهدت شكل من أشكال التصعيد للعنف أو تطورات أوضاع الانتهاكات أو أوضاع مستجدة مثل الأوضاع الاقتصادية والأوضاع الإنسانية تم التركيز عليها بأنه لابد من
focused in the humanitarian situation that should be included in the roadmap that reflected the feedback of the local communities in addressing their cases and issues. The local community, how did the local community dealt with the roadmap? I was in Wujud as partner to this process. I was in Eden Governorate. I can say that in all the reports that and the feedback by different governorates has provided, has complemented or praised this document, which I said is a first draft document, and the men themselves expressed their viewpoints. So there are local community leaders that they said how women managed to develop this document in a Yemeni spirit and provided it at such high proficiency. For us, this was advantage for women, how they manage and involved in both their participation despite the exclusion they are facing in the peace process, and to come to produce this document which express the Yemeni voice, the Yemeni voice for peace. Therefore, the viewpoint of the community to develop it as guiding framework for peace did not come from out of the blue moon, despite the connection between the community and the content of this roadmap as address their issues and the issue and the addresses also the peace issues. Thank you so much.
By Ustad Amal Basha. And there are actually three questions. The first one is about the peace consultations in Riyadh and your optimism towards it, particularly that the Houthis have refused to participate. The second question is about the content of the Feminist Peace Roadmap and how does it link to the Women, Peace and Security agenda in Yemen. And the third question is any negative impact of climate change on Yemeni women. Thank you, Risha.
Hi, thank you. For the first question about the Riyadh consultations, I have personally been invited, and I will admit I am naively optimistic about it, although that not all the parties are going, but we are just desperate for any kind of peace and political process. I think the peace process needs two levels. The first level, the parties who are kind of under the same, like the civil society, the political parties, the political entities, all of them coming together to have some kind of consensus about political arrangements and about military and security arrangements, economic arrangements, all of the issues that needs to be discussed. Then we will be ready to engage with the Houthis in an overall comprehensive peace process. So for the peace process that is led by the UN Envoy office, he's doing individual focused consultations with each political party and political entity. For the process led by the Gulf Cooperation Council, it is more of a dialogue. It is close to the national dialogue process, I think, that we had. And it is focusing on intra talks between Yemenis, and we are going to define and shape the agenda. This is my perception about the process. The second part of the question, which is regarding the Feminist Peace Roadmap. The Feminist Peace Roadmap is when we worked on it, all of the attention was on the ceasefire process, because in 2020 it was with the COVID, the global call of the UN Security Council of the UN Secretary General to ceasefire. So it was important to focus our energy on the ceasefire process. So it has a big section of the ceasefire, but also we also had a section on the political dialogue and what we aspire to have in terms of agenda, in terms of the political, in terms of the peace negotiations. And then the third part, which is about the transitional period and what we aspire to have during the transitional period. And we were pushing for a federal system to be tested as beta testing during the transitional period, to form some transitional institutions to support the transition. The last question about the climate change, there is a lot of studies out there that were conducted by Yemeni researchers and also by some international organizations such as Oxfam and other organizations that address climate change. So the impact on women is disproportionate, usually always on women. It's affecting them differently. When there is food insecurity and the food is available, the women are always last to eat. In terms of healthcare, when people get sick, the women are the first in the front lines, taking care of those who are getting sick and ill and getting sick themselves more than because they are caregivers. All of this is impacting women disproportionately. Thank you, Layla.
Thank you so much, Risha. My next question is for دكتورة بلقيس. دكتورة بلقيس, كيف يمكن زيادة الجهود الفاعلة للتأكيد على التمكين
How can we
الاقتصادي؟
increase the effective efforts to strengthen on the economic empowerment of women to improve their decision-making participation, and what are the efforts that are being done to economically empower Yemeni women?
حضرتك على mute.
You are on mute. Forgive me, Layla, can you repeat the question? I did not, the line was not clear. The question, how can we increase the effective efforts to emphasize on the economic empowerment of Yemeni women and to improve their participation in decision-making positions? Well, I believe that there are major efforts that are conducted by Yemeni women in this respect. The different coalitions and movements demanding for women in decision-making positions and demanding their inclusion in the peace process. So these demands are in order to achieve the economic demands of women. If women are included in the political process in the early stages of it, I believe this will have positive impacts on the other demands of women. The other thing, economically, we know that the economic situation in Yemen is difficult, especially for women. Now it has been 8 years without salaries. Actually, the public servants are not receiving salaries for 8 years. The most affected sectors are the health and education, and largely women work in these two sectors. So we do have a societal issue and women issue. So we do need some significant efforts from the international community, from the donors, and from all parties to help women to have a form of economic empowerment for women in the country. So I have prepared a study on women during COVID-19 and the economic damages women suffered from. So women sustained economic losses, and the coronavirus, for example, restrictions were applied on them, not on men. So they had to work in an unfavorable environment, and the conflict and all these things need us to work on them. And I believe that the Special Envoy Office needs to take the economic issues seriously. And there are demands to have a special envoy for the economic issues so he can deal with all these economic matters and to help the Yemeni society economically. Thank you. Thank you for the response.
Some remark. As we're approaching the end of this discussion, I want to hear more from you about the main takeaway from what has been said, and how do you think the international community can support Yemeni women? Thank you.
Thank you, Layla, and thank you, everyone. Just a word of caution for the translators. I will be switching back and forth between Arabic and English. I'll try to do my best to be disciplined, but I cannot promise. So, because I'm eternally confused, and very often I mix English and Arabic. As a true Sudanese intellectuals, we have this particular illness. The first takeaway from today's discussion for me is that sadly, we still witness a very low level or threshold of participation of women in the ongoing either peace process or any of the processes leading to resolution of the conflict. I was taken by Balghi's statement that women still do not exist politically in Yemen. And I think that might be tongue-in-cheek, but I think it is really more or less true. And I think that there is a need, and it goes without saying, for the participation of women at the various levels of any of the processes that are ongoing, including, but not limited to the peace process. This morning I was looking at Georgetown. I'm teaching at Georgetown this particular year, So I'm familiar with some of the tools that exist at the university, and there's this Women Peace Index, or Women Participation in Peace Index. And for 2021-22, Yemen, in terms of participation of women in the peace process, ranked 168 out of 170 countries. That tells you where things, even now at the height of the conflict. And speaking of the Riyadh conference, I don't know if some of you saw some of the rumors and some of the documents that were circulated in terms of the list of the people participating. And I couldn't help, even in rumors, Yemeni women are excluded, because when I look at those lists that were circulated, I think women probably constitute 1 or 2% of the overall list of participation. I don't know what's the actual figures for Russia, but I think it's worthwhile to have a look at the number of women that have been invited to the consultations in Riyadh. Switching to Arabic. النقطة الثانية اللي أنا لاحظتها.
The second point that I have noticed, the second takeaway from the discussion, which is very important, which was indicated by Ishraq, it is that now we have reached a stage in the conflict where we are used now to a certain pattern of violations against women in Yemen because of the conflict in the country and its ramifications. And I believe that this is a very important issue. We need to think about it. The more protracted the conflict is, the more burden on the Yemeni people is there at large, but on women in particular. And the concern here is that with the recent events in Russia and Ukraine, we may have reached a stage where it's normal. So what is happening in Yemen now is something normalized. But we need to understand that the human losses are still accumulating. So it's not the end. We have not reached the end. It has been 7 years of the conflict, which is very important for the history of the conflict. To English.
Hoff, I think he highlighted a very important point, and that is participation of young people in the ongoing process. Women and young people, but also women are young as well, just like the young person Nadia Saqaf mentioned, and that's music to my ears, that there is now an ongoing process for engaging young people in the reconciliation process. Why did I pick on this? Because some of you know that I've been working on Yemen for a long time, and I'm also a Sudanese. And one point of meeting in terms of the realities of both countries is there's a dire need for almost an entire change of the entire leadership or the political leadership in both countries. And I've seen this in Sudan, and the way that is happening now and unfolding is that young people have taken the lead. And that has proven very difficult for the military, for any potential dictatorship, because they are not motivated or shackled by traditional leadership issues that are inherently male-dominated, or they're also mostly centered around personal interests. So I think it's really important, Nadia and the others, to really kind of push a lot more for a wider participation in this regard. And I think it was Bilghis who mentioned the importance of bridging the gap between spoken words and the actual practices. And I think, I don't think it's far-fetched to say that if the national dialogue has reached a 30% threshold, it seems to me very commonsensical that is to be applied for any ongoing processes as a starting point. And then perhaps also look at the roadmap as a test case. I think this whole rhetoric about women, it's important for them to participate and blah, 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 that's something that now you hear. Obviously, there's nothing to be gained from stating the obvious if it's not followed by, bless you, Leila, if it's not followed by concrete steps as how do you do this? And my suggestion would be put on the table some practical steps needed to be taken. Why not start with those two steps? One is the roadmap applicable? Could it be implemented? And what does it mean in practice to implement it? Two, there are some achievements Nadia highlighted in relation to the national dialogue. What prevents them from being implemented at this particular point in juncture? It seems to me also commonsensical. But again, if you find a way to entrust more young people, and by definition more women, with some of those tasks, it seems to me that that would be very useful. There's one question, Leila, that I saw earlier. I don't know who asked them, but the Dutch ambassador, I don't know if he's with us or he left.
He had to leave to catch a plane.
Yeah. I think there's one of the people who asked him because he said women should not wait for an invitation. So somebody asked him, actually, how do you do that? And I think that's a really important question. I wish that both him and the US envoy could have been here to see actually that I think there's a willingness to take the lead. But Yemen is one of those cases where traditional leadership has cemented its presence. There is no entry point that is possible beyond the token ways and the verbal recognition. So it seems to me that's an area where there should be a more forceful discussion as to what you need to do in that regard. So النقطة الرابعة اللي هي النقطة الخاصة.
The fourth point is the one related to the environment, the climate, and the impact of war in Yemen and the role of women. I believe we have not sadly discussed this issue or topic at length today, but we have started maybe, and I propose to you, I think Rasha said that in her quotations, she said that we don't need to be genius to understand that the current deterioration of the environment affects women disproportionately. All the harmful things to women, in addition to the general impact, there is an additional impact on women. And therefore, I believe that this is the first point. The second point, the Dutch ambassador mentioned it, and it's still there, which is a ceasefire tanker. I believe until now, we have not examined the gender perspective of ceasefire tanker. We hope that we avert this disaster, because if the worst case scenario happens, I believe, as Russia indicated, the impact of that will be more on women, and it will be an additional burden on women. The thing that I wanted to focus on, and I will say it in English.
One of the issues that have always presented me was a nightmare in Yemen. And I think it has a very serious environmental impact, is the issue of landmines. I really think that this is basically Yemen's silent killer. And this is going to be a source of continuing human rights violations in Yemen, even if peace is achieved tomorrow in the country. Again, this is a serious issue. And if I can just put to you 2 or 3 very simple examples from an environmental point of view, but also from a very basic human security point of view. As the number of women who are becoming heads of households in Yemen is increasing, their mobility is also increasing. And again, Sahar, I think Ambassador Sahar said earlier, you need to look at women in the rural areas or the local level. The mere mobility of these women and searching for whatever it is, you can imagine their potential maiming and killing and all other kind of misery that will be generated by landmines. Second point, which is simple, the impact of that on agriculture and livelihood. There's indiscriminate, wide use of landmines. Again, I have a feeling that it will have a dramatic effect on food security in Yemen because simply it affects agriculture. Third, and this is also a rural issue, search for wood and other sources of energy for cooking and whatever it is. Just try to imagine the impact of landmines, and I think you can have a picture in terms of how would this affect all of Yemen, but I would not be exaggerating if I say that landmines are fairly important. Nadia drew my attention that actually Ishraq mentioned this, so I apologize. But I feel very strongly about it, and I'm consumed by this issue. And perhaps Leila, you can also shed some light at some point on the IHL dimensions of this, because again, Yemen is not part of the Landmines Convention, but I think we can make an argument for customary international law, or at least do no harm discussions in relation to this particular issue. These are the things that I really see as fairly important takeaways. So to recap, and I think those are the, I will read some of the points that are to be highlighted. The issue of the environment must be prioritized, but also we must look carefully into the impact of that on women and the conflict in Yemen. We need to emphasize the importance of inclusive peace process, which means that women have to be included in a meaningful way and not in the usual token way. 3, we must really take note of any local initiatives and local ownership issues when it comes to discussion of such important issues. We also must recognize the importance of women and young people as important drivers of peace. And we also must look into a more egalitarian way of allocating humanitarian assistance or funding, and that women initiatives and young people initiatives are well and funded and recognized. And I think the most important thing that I mentioned earlier, I think we should all try our best to make sure that the Feminist Roadmap is taken very seriously and also used, as I said, as a test case. And I think everybody will be open to the fact that actually these could be amended, and also in terms of actually today's discussion could be used to tighten the parts that dealing with women and environment. And I think, Russia, it is a living document as long as it is used as a blueprint, or at least one of the blueprints for more meaningful participation. My sincere apologies if I forgot some other points, or I repeated some, or I ignored some contributions, but this is as much as I can recollect from the various notes. And I forgot actually that Maha Awad, and I'm always amazed by the ability to get this summit going, the Feminist Summit in Yemen. And I'm forever grateful for being part of that particular summit. And I look at it as another example that I think Nadia's initiative and yours and all of those things, we should have a moral responsibility to promote and to highlight. Thank you, Leila and others.
Thank you so much, Dr. Al Ubaid. Fantastic sum up. And I'd actually like to follow on a few points you said really well. As a witness of all the fantastic work that the Yemeni feminist activists have been doing over the past years, I have to highlight the first that Yemeni women were the first to highlight technical solutions to previous special envoys on how to actually make participation happen at the level of each peace initiative, including suggesting empty seats, when suggesting that delegations have mandatory number of seats for women and leaving them empty if they didn't come. This took quite a few years to be implemented, but it was the idea of feminist activists in Yemen, and it has to be credited as so. The second one is the unbelievable work that has been the space that has been created to go when not invited. And I recall many chances that have been created by, and here we have to credit Peace Track Initiative and the Yemeni Solidarity Network for carving a space for women presence and women's voices in the most uninclusive spaces. Unfortunately, in the whole episodes of Yemeni conversations, they were there, they created the space for themselves, and they wonderfully brought the voices of Yemeni women and made all the difference despite how difficult it is. And the third one is what you mentioned about international humanitarian law. And also I want to bring light, we rarely see light brought to the work of Yemeni grassroots and feminist activists and lawyers around the world who are not only looking about the applicability of international humanitarian law, but also linking it to the transfer of arms, to state responsibility, and to the work of non-state actors. I think the international humanitarian law is going to be pushed into even more development because of the work put by activists on the local and national and international level. So it can lead us to more justice and more prevention. So big, huge respect for all the work that has been done by Peace Track Initiative, by the Women's Solidarity Network, and by all the effort by different mechanisms, and addressing the massive toll that Yemeni women took upon themselves to make that happen. Relentless, absolutely fantastic. So thank you for all the work you do. Unfortunately, we covered all the time for questions. We're approaching the end, but I'm happy with the amount of questions that has been addressed, both verbally and in writing. So if you feel your question hasn't been answered, check if it has been answered in writing, because if you have been. And I want to conclude by a big thank you to our panelists and for the huge amount of information and experience and analysis that you gave to us today, and for your optimism and commitment to the cause. It's been just wonderful to engage with. And obviously, as always, to PTI for organizing this, for bringing these fantastic speakers together, and for all those behind the scene, PTI team and our interpreters and all of those who made this happen. It's been a lot of hard work, and I thank you all for giving us the chance to listen to these fantastic speeches, and for our fantastic speakers for always keeping us informed and giving us the chance to hope for Yemen. The Yemeni Feminist Peace Roadmap is available on PTI's website in English and Arabic. It's a living document, but it's out there. And this event will be on YouTube and on the Facebook channel for PTI. So thank you all for all our attendees for coming and for your questions and for making this an open and interesting conversation. Thank you all for your time and have a wonderful day.